Mr. Mercer, that driveway is a blight on this community. And if you won't bring it into compliance voluntarily, the Pinecrest Homeowners Association will pursue every legal remedy available to us. Every single one. That was Brenda Holst, standing at the end of my gravel drive on a Thursday morning in April of 2019. White linen blazer over yoga pants. Clipboard pressed to her chest like she was holding a warrant. Pearl earrings catching the morning light, her white luxury SUV idling on the county road behind her, with a Pinecrest Estates parking pass swinging from the rear-view mirror. She had driven that SUV up my driveway apron to deliver the speech, stepped out onto gravel she had no authority over, and was now informing me what she expected me to do with my own property. She had been president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association for 6 years running, and in her experience that title had generally been sufficient to produce the desired outcome. What she did not know, and what she had never once thought to verify, was that the road her entire neighborhood drove every single day to reach their own front doors ran across 60 feet of ground my deed had owned since the summer of 2001. 23 years of recorded ownership sitting in the Mesa Verde County Deed Index, available to anyone who cared to drive to the clerk's office and pull it. She had not pulled it. That was the whole problem and the whole solution. And I knew it before she finished her sentence. If you want to know what I did with that information, stay close, because the answer took 5 years to build, and it arrived at the Mesa Verde County Courthouse in the form of a document that ended an argument nobody on her side was prepared to have. What would you have done? My name is Dale Mercer. I am 58 years old. For 30 years, I worked as a civil road contractor and right-of-way specialist, building access roads across the Mountain West, running grading crews, managing right-of-way acquisition, and reading easement filings and plat maps at county recorders' offices across Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. I know what a legally recorded right-of-way looks like on paper, what its description contains, what language marks it as valid, and what it means when that language is absent entirely. When my late wife Connie and I purchased this parcel in the summer of 2001, the first thing I did before we unpacked a single box was drive to the Mesa Verde County Recorder's office and pull the original 1968 plat for the old Hartley Ranch subdivision, the document that had first divided this section of high foothills country into legal parcels. I spread it across the kitchen table next to our deed and compared every line of the legal description against every boundary shown on that plat. Measurement by measurement. Connie made coffee and watched me work and said nothing, which was her way of acknowledging that this was simply part of who I was and was not going to change. She was a practical woman, clear-eyed and direct, with no patience for self-delusion in herself or in anyone she spent time with. She had her own version of the same careful habit, except hers operated on people rather than plat maps, and she was almost never wrong about either. The land is 4.2 acres of western Colorado high country, sitting at roughly 7,000 feet in elevation, with a shop building Connie and I put up ourselves in 2003. A gravel drive I laid by hand across the front 40 yards of the parcel, a split rail fence along the south and west perimeters, and a view across an open meadow that runs to a tree line about 300 yards out and changes character 4 times a year in ways I've never fully gotten used to. Spring turns it the kind of green that looks almost wrong at altitude. Fall burns it orange and rust before the first snow comes down off the ridge and makes everything honest again. We were not subdivision people. We wanted working land with room around it, room to maintain equipment without permits for the parking, room to raise a kid with actual ground under his boots, room to build something that did not require a homeowners association to approve the lumber color. When the Pinecrest Estates development was platted on the adjacent land in 2003, and the HOA formed the following year, and its CC and RS were recorded against the Pinecrest subdivision lots, Our parcel was not included in that plat. It was never meant to be. Our deed boundary ran along the east side of our split-rail fence and stopped there. The Pinecrest lots began on the other side of that line, and no instrument ever extended the HOA's reach past it. What I had noticed in that first week of ownership, laying the 1968 plat against our deed on the kitchen table, was something easy to miss if you were not specifically looking for it. The 60-foot strip along the eastern edge of our parcel, running roughly 300 yards from the county road north into the back of the property, was fully inside our deed boundary. It had been part of the original Hartley Ranch acreage, absorbed into our recorded parcel at purchase, with no easement reserved, no access right noted, no right-of-way dedication of any kind included in the instrument. When the Pinecrest developer graded and built the subdivision access road in 2003, that road went in across our 60-foot strip without a single piece of recorded paper authorizing the use. Nobody reached out to us. Nobody pulled our deed. The road was built, used daily, and assumed to be available in perpetuity, the way a lot of rural access in the West gets established before somebody eventually checks the paperwork and finds out it was never formalized in any legal sense. I noted the gap that first week and filed it in the part of my professional memory reserved for things that have not yet become relevant. Then I turned back to the work of building a life. Connie died in February of 2016. She had been sick for 14 months before that. And in the last year, she spent a good portion of her days in the chair by the south window, watching the meadow light change through the seasons. I sat near her as much as I could between jobs, sometimes working at the kitchen table where she could see me, and I could hear her without either of us having to raise our voices. Our son Wyatt was 14 when she died. He had her eyes and her handwriting and the particular kind of patience she carried, the quiet kind that does not look like anything special from the outside because it has no need to announce itself. He stayed with me full-time after the funeral, finishing his last years of school in town, working the property on weekends, keeping the shop tidy in the way that mattered to both of us because it had mattered to her. We had a blue heeler named Rook, who had come to us as a pup the summer before Connie got sick and had since organized his entire existence around the routine of the place, with the focused loyalty that breed is known for. He was at my boot most mornings and at the shop door every night. By the spring of 2019, when Brenda Holst made her first appearance at the end of my driveway, Wyatt was 16, lean and watchful, and had the noticing habit his mother had given him, the one that pays more attention to what people do than what they say. I told Brenda that Thursday morning that my property was not subject to the Pinecrest CC and ours and never had been. I said it flat, without raising my voice, holding my coffee mug with both hands and letting her stand on the gravel. She clicked her pen against the clipboard and told me the gravel driveway was inconsistent with community standards, and that she expected pavers or seal coat completed and inspected by October 1st. I told her to put that in writing. She said she absolutely would, in a tone that suggested she was not accustomed to being told to put things in writing. She walked back to her SUV with the clipboard under her arm. I went inside, found a manila folder on the supply shelf above my workbench, wrote Holst HOA on the tab in black marker, and put it in its own section of the filing cabinet. Wyatt was at the kitchen table when I came back through. He asked what the woman in the blazer wanted. I told him she had opinions about our driveway. He asked if she had any actual authority over our driveway. I told him she did not, but that she did not know that yet, and that the folder on the shelf was going to be the reason that gap eventually closed in our favor. He glanced at the filing cabinet and then back at his book. He understood more about what that meant than I expected him to at 16. The written notice arrived 2 weeks later, formally worded, citing specific CC and R subsections, describing our parcel as being, in Brenda's language, functionally part of the Pinecrest Estates community, based on its adjacency and visual relationship to the development. I noted that word, functionally. Not legally, not per any recorded instrument binding our land, but functionally, the language of someone who has decided that proximity is jurisdiction and prefers not to examine the legal distinction too carefully. I drafted a response that same evening, 2 paragraphs, citing our deed page number, the recorded plat boundary, and the absence of any document binding our parcel to the association's covenants. Brief, factual, and sent certified mail with the return receipt filed. In June, a second notice arrived with nearly identical language. I sent the same response updated with the current date, referenced the prior exchange, and filed everything. September brought a third notice, this one adding new requirements. The equipment storage behind the shop, described as a commercial staging operation in a residential zone, needed to be removed or screened. My skid steer, my trailer, my service truck, on my own fenced land. I sent the same letter for the third time, added a paragraph on the county land use provisions permitting my use, and formally noted that I had now requested 3 separate times the recorded legal instrument establishing the HOA's jurisdiction over my parcel, and had received none back because none existed. Wyatt helped me print and fold that third letter. On the walk to the mailbox, he asked why I responded in writing every time instead of just saying no on the porch. I told him that a verbal no is a memory, and a certified letter is a record, and that records outlast memories in a courthouse by a significant margin. He thought about that for a moment, and then asked if he could start keeping the dates in the legal pad himself. I told him he could. The fines began arriving in January of 2020. 3 of them, dated across January and February, $250 each, all assessed under the authority the HOA claimed over my parcel. Each one was legally baseless for the same reason every prior notice had been baseless. My land was not inside the Pinecrest plat boundary, and the HOA had no recorded instrument extending its reach to it. I sent formal written objections to each fine, same certified mail process. Same request for the foundational document they could not produce. Wyatt kept the running tally in the legal pad, neat and exact. Fine 1, $250, January 14th. Fine 2, $250, January 28th. Fine 3, $250, February 11th. $750 levied, 0 collected. He had started totaling the columns at the bottom of each page without being asked, in the same way his mother used to update the household accounts without mentioning she had done it. The second month of 2020 also brought a personal visit. Brenda arrived at the gate with a different posture than her first visit. More formal, a man from her board standing 1 step behind her. She said the association had decided to escalate its enforcement posture, and that a lien would be placed on my property if I did not respond to the outstanding notices and fines within 30 days. I told her, calmly and at the gate, that a lien requires jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction requires a recorded legal instrument, and that I had requested that instrument now 4 separate times by certified mail and received nothing. I asked her to confirm in writing that the association intended to proceed with a lien so that I could forward that confirmation to my attorney. She said her attorney would be in contact. I said I looked forward to that. She left. I wrote up the conversation before supper, timed and dated. The board member standing behind her had not said a single word the entire time. 6 incidents on file. The spring of 2021 brought the bollard. A Tuesday morning in May, while I was 40 minutes away on a ranch grading job, a landscaping crew arrived at my property in an unmarked white pickup. They installed a wooden bollard post at my driveway apron, where it met the county road. then built a decorative berm of river rock and ornamental grass around the base. Tidy and finished looking, as if it had always been there. It sealed my driveway completely. Wyatt called from the house with a steady voice and each word chosen. He had gone to the kitchen window when he heard the truck and photographed the crew and the vehicle before they finished. I told him to stay inside, not to approach the crew, and to get the plate number. He had already written it down on a notepad from the kitchen drawer. I drove home, found the crew gone and the obstruction in place, and called the Mesa Verde County Sheriff. Deputy Fern arrived in 40 minutes. He was methodical and thorough, the kind of officer who takes notes with the understanding that those notes may someday be read in a courthouse. He documented the bollard and the berm, photographed them from multiple angles, recorded the plate number Wyatt had written down, and took a brief statement from each of us. Then he explained the situation plainly. Civil obstruction of this type required civil process to remedy. He could not direct its removal that afternoon. What he advised before returning to his cruiser was that a documented pattern of incidents, 6 separate dated entries with physical evidence, would give the county grounds for a more active response. He named that threshold clearly. I thanked him, wrote down every word of our conversation before supper, and noted that I had 11 documented incidents in the folder already. 11 filed, 0 fines paid. I used the back gate for 63 days while the civil paperwork moved through the court. The order came down in July. The bollard was gone by Monday morning. I photographed every stage of the removal and added the photographs to the folder. That week, I called Lyle Castano. Lyle had worked as Mesa Verde County Road Supervisor for 22 years, and before that had done survey and title work in the same county for another decade. He drove out on a Saturday morning with a thermos of coffee and his own copy of the county deed index printout. And we spread the 1968 plat and my deed description across the kitchen table and worked through both documents carefully for 2 hours. Wyatt made a second pot of coffee at the hour mark and set it on the counter without interrupting the work. Rook slept under the table. Lyle worked through the plat section by section with his reading glasses down his nose and a red pen that he clicked against the tabletop between measurements, the way a man does when he is tracking something precise and wants to mark his place without losing it. When he reached the end, he set the pen down flat and looked at me over the glasses and said, "You own that strip, Dale. You have owned it since 2001. And there is not one recorded instrument in Mesa Verde County that says any differently. I heard it the way you hear something you already knew confirmed from the outside." He wrote 3 pages of notes in his own hand, dated each page, and signed each one. I put those notes in the folder and put the folder back on the shelf. I had a call to set with Paul Sheridan in Grand Junction. Paul was a property and right-of-way attorney who had handled access disputes across the western slope for 30 years. And I was not walking into his office until I had Lyle's signed notes in hand and every document in the folder indexed and organized. I went back to work. The position was clear. The timing was not yet. The fake inspector arrived in October of 2022. A man in a polo shirt and khaki pants parked a personal pickup at my front gate on a Wednesday afternoon and announced through the intercom that he was from Mesa Verde County Code Enforcement and needed to conduct a compliance inspection of the equipment storage area. I walked out to the gate. The badge he held up was a clip-on rectangle with a county seal. I recognized immediately as the commercially available version sold through office supply catalogs and municipal novelty distributors, not the laminated county-issued photo identification that Mesa Verde code officers carry. County officers also arrive in marked county vehicles. His truck had no markings of any kind. I asked him twice, clearly and without hostility, for his full employee identification number and the name of his supervising officer. He gave me a first name and handed me a business card that listed a local phone number and no county address, no department name, no supervisor listed. I told him calmly that I would verify his credentials through the county code office before we proceeded, and that I would appreciate his supervisor giving me a call to confirm the appointment. He said he would follow up and drove away. I photographed his license plate as he pulled out of the driveway. I called the Mesa Verde County Code Office within 15 minutes and spoke to a supervisor who confirmed no inspector had been dispatched to my address that day, and who took the plate number I provided and made her own departmental note. I wrote the full account in the legal pad within the hour: date, time, physical description, the badge, the business card, the plate number, the supervisor's name, and what she said. Incident 17. 0 fines paid. The folder now required 2 rubber bands and a binder clip to hold closed. In 2023, Craig Holst's resort development plans became serious enough that their requirements started shaping what Brenda did. Craig ran Holst Development LLC, and he had a deal in progress with a regional hospitality group that wanted to acquire Pinecrest Estates and expand it into a mountain destination resort property. That deal required a certain picture of the community: consistent aesthetic, clean entry corridor, no visible adjacent commercial operations in the pitch materials or the site photographs. My gravel lot and equipment yard had been identified in Craig's prospectus as a complication to be resolved. Beginning in late September of 2023, business owners and property owners across Mesa Verde County who had hired me for right-of-way and grading work began receiving phone calls from someone representing the HOA, telling them I was operating an unlicensed commercial business in a residential zone in violation of county code, and suggesting they might want to consider whether they wanted to remain associated with that situation. The language was measured, the kind of careful phrasing designed to plant doubt without creating legal exposure. 2 clients canceled. The first was Roy Tidwell, a rancher who had hired me to grade access on his 20-acre property outside town. He called me personally to explain. He was apologetic and uncomfortable. He said he did not want the trouble. I told him I understood completely, thanked him for calling rather than simply going quiet, and asked if he would write down what he had been told and who had told him. He wrote it out 3 days later and signed an affidavit. A second client sent me a text message explaining his decision to cancel. I saved the message and printed a copy of it before I responded. 2 contracts lost. 2 documented written accounts of the calls and what was said. I wrote those figures in 2 columns in the legal pad and sat with them. Sandra Pruitt called the following week. Sandra had been the HOA treasurer since 2018 and served as the board's recording secretary, responsible for keeping the official meeting minutes. She chose her words on the phone with the deliberate care of a person who had thought carefully about what she was going to say before she picked up the phone and who understood that the call itself could become a matter of record. She told me she had been present at a board meeting where the client call campaign had been discussed and authorized, and that Craig Holst had spoken at that meeting and had driven the authorization. She said she believed what was happening was wrong, and that she could not continue to be part of it. I thanked her, asked if she had been preserving copies of the relevant board minutes, and she said yes, going back 18 months. I asked if she would be willing to maintain those records and make them available through formal legal process if it came to that point. She said yes, without hesitation. I ended the call, made a careful note in the folder with a reference I would recognize and no one else would, and called Paul Sheridan that same evening. I told him we were ready to move. He said bring the full folder to Grand Junction on Tuesday. Lyle rode with me. Paul went through everything at his conference table over 3 hours. The full stack, the notices, the fine objections, Deputy Fern's incident reports, Lyle's title notes, the fake inspector documentation, Roy Tidwell's affidavit. the second client's text message, my reference to Sandra's call. When he finished, he set the last folder flat and asked 2 questions. Had I been to the Mesa Verde County Recorder's office recently, 3 times in the past month? Was I ready to file the quiet title action on the 60-foot strip? I told him I'd been thinking about it for 4 years. He said, "Let's build the filing." We spent 2 more hours constructing that document before I drove home. The quiet title action cited the 1968 plat, the 2001 deed, and the complete absence of any easement, right-of-way dedication, or access instrument in the Mesa Verde County records, going back to the original plat date. County Clerk Donna Hatch accepted the filing. The recording acknowledgement came back stamped and indexed under my name in the county deed records 6 weeks before the pre-trial hearing date. The filing was unopposed. Nobody at Pinecrest, as far as Paul and I could determine after a careful index review, had any awareness that it existed. The HOA's civil lawsuit arrived in February of 2024. Marcus Webb had signed the complaint, and his pleading described my parcel as being within the boundaries of the Pinecrest Estates development. Paul read that line and said the 4 words I had been working toward for 5 years. They do not know. That same week, Brenda's landscaping crew returned to my property. My south corner camera had been running continuously since Wyatt installed the system in the spring of 2021, saving to a local drive and a remote drive at my brother's place in Grand Junction. The footage from a Thursday morning in February showed the crew pulling my mailbox post out of the ground with a chain and a truck hitch, then a front loader reversing over the corner section of my split rail fence, cracking 2 rails cleanly at the post. The full operation took 11 minutes. I pulled the footage that evening and copied it to 4 separate locations before I made any other call or touched the damaged fence. Wyatt was at the kitchen table when I came in from the shop. He looked at my face and asked what had happened out there. I told him they had put something on camera they should not have done, and that the rest of it had been building in the folder for 5 years, and that it was time to go to the courthouse. He nodded the way his mother used to nod, slow and settled, like he had known this was where it was heading and was simply ready for the last part. He asked if he could come to the hearing. I told him he should plan on it. The pre-trial hearing was a Tuesday morning in March. I drove to the Mesa Verde County Courthouse with Paul Sheridan, who moved through the building with the unhurried pace of someone who has done this work many times and has no reason to hurry on a morning like this one. Brenda sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus Webb in a good dark suit, who had the easy posture of someone who had reviewed the file and found his position solid. Craig Holst was in the gallery, second row, a coffee in his hand, sport coat on, with the settled expression of a man expecting a routine and favorable morning. Wyatt sat in the back row of the gallery. He had worn a clean shirt. The judge called the matter. Marcus laid out the HOA's case with methodical competence. The driveway was non-compliant. The fines had been properly assessed. The injunction was necessary to achieve compliance, and the respondent had been given years of reasonable opportunity to resolve the situation. He was organized, confident, and he had not pulled the deed. Paul stood up and said he would like to enter 3 documents into the record before responding to any of the plaintiff's claims. He placed the certified copy of the original 1968 plat map on the table. He placed the certified copy of my deed, recorded August 2001, with the legal description of the 60-foot strip highlighted in yellow. Then he placed the quiet title filing, stamped and indexed by Donna Hatch at the Mesa Verde County Clerk's office 6 weeks prior, recording my formal ownership of the 60-foot strip unopposed and legally effective as of the filing date. Paul set those 3 documents side by side on the table and let them sit in silence for a moment. Long enough for Marcus to look at all 3, which he did. Then he said that before the court addressed the question of my driveway, It might want to determine whether the road that every Pinecrest resident drove each day to reach their own homes was in fact sitting on private land belonging to the respondent, with no recorded easement, no right-of-way dedication, and no legal access instrument of any kind on record in Mesa Verde County. The room went still, not the ordinary quiet of a courtroom between statements, but the particular stillness that settles when something irrevocable has been said aloud and cannot be walked back. Marcus studied the plat map. He read the deed description. He turned to the second page of the quiet title filing and read through it carefully. Craig Holst's coffee cup moved very slowly to his knee. Brenda's hands were flat on the table, and the line of her jaw had tightened by 1 degree. The judge asked Donna Hatch, present in the gallery as a witness, to confirm the recording. She confirmed the date and the index number from her own records and stated the filing had not been contested. The judge looked at the plat. He looked at the deed description. He asked Marcus Webb whether his client had been aware of this recorded title question prior to filing the injunction request. Marcus asked for a 30-minute recess. The judge granted it. Craig Holst walked out of the gallery before the sentence finished. He did not look at Brenda. In the corridor, Paul told me Marcus would come back with a request for continuance to investigate the title history. He was right. But before we adjourned, Paul submitted one more document. Sandra Pruitt had preserved those board minutes exactly as she had promised, and she had delivered them through proper legal channels in time for the hearing. Those minutes showed that Craig Holst had commissioned a private title review of the Pinecrest Access Road during the first quarter of 2023 as part of his resort deal due diligence. That review had flagged the 60-foot strip and noted the absence of any recorded easement. Craig had received the report. He had not disclosed its contents to the HOA board, to Marcus Webb, or to any Pinecrest resident whose mortgage depended on that road remaining accessible. He had instead authorized the escalating campaign against me, including the harassment of my clients, in apparent expectation of forcing a settlement or departure before the title question surfaced. Paul submitted the minutes without comment. He let the dates and the contents carry their own weight. The lawsuit was withdrawn within the week. The fine demand of $14,750 was formally vacated, not reduced, not settled at a discount, but vacated in its entirety, because the court had seen the plat and the deed and the quiet title filing, and there was no remaining legal basis for the claim. Paul filed the counterclaim for the fence and mailbox damage the same day. The footage made that settlement direct and uncomplicated. $4,600, paid in full within 90 days. Brenda resigned the HOA presidency in April, 3 weeks after the hearing, with a brief letter to the board that did not explain her reasons. The Pinecrest residents held an emergency meeting and voted to negotiate a formal access easement from me for Holst Lane, which they needed to maintain their title insurance coverage and the terms of their existing mortgages. More than one resident called me personally in the weeks between the hearing and the negotiations to say they had not known about the title issue. I believed them. My attorney handled the negotiation through the summer. The easement was recorded in July at terms I was satisfied with. Craig's resort deal had already collapsed months before, when the hospitality group's own title search pulled the access question during due diligence, and they walked away from the contract without explanation. Holst Development LLC filed for reorganization 8 months after the courthouse hearing. That was the proportionate and direct consequence of a decision Craig had made more than a year before the hearing, when a title report named a specific problem, and he chose escalation over disclosure. I drove home from the settlement signing on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, the meadow full green, the light running long and warm from the west. Wyatt was in the driveway when I pulled in, washing the truck, Rook sitting in a patch of afternoon sun watching the hose move with the focused patience that is his natural state. I told Wyatt it was finished. All of it, entirely and officially done. He nodded once, the way his mother would have nodded when something resolved the way it was always going to resolve, patient and unsurprised. Then after a moment he asked if he could drive out to the county road and come back. Just to do it. Just to drive the driveway all the way through without a bollard in the way or a berm in the apron or anything else that did not belong there. I handed him the keys. He backed out careful and slow, made the turn, and drove to the county road. Rook rode in the truck bed with the wind in his ears. I stood at the shop door with my hands in my pockets and watched the taillights go and come back. And I thought about Connie, who had watched me come home from the recorder's office in the first week after we bought this land. The plat rolled under my arm, and who had asked me whether the paperwork was clean. I had told her it was more than clean. She had nodded exactly the way Wyatt just had, said good, and gone back inside to make dinner. I took the folder off the shelf and held it for a moment. The whole fat stack of 5 years of patience, everything rubber-banded and dated and indexed. Then I put it back. It stays on that shelf now. I do not need it anymore. But I do not put down things I earned. Here is what I want you to take from this. Pull your actual deed from the county recorder, not the summary your agent gave you at closing. The original recorded instrument, with the full legal description. Then find the original subdivision plat or township plat for your area, and lay both documents on a table and compare every line and every measurement to one another. Walk your physical boundary, all of it, including the back and the sides, not just the front yard. If a road, a shared driveway, an alley, a footpath, or any regularly used access crosses your land, find out whether there is a recorded easement, a right-of-way dedication, or any written instrument formally authorizing that use. Look in the county deed index by parcel. If there is nothing there, you have a position you may never need to use, but you need to know it exists before someone else decides to get curious about the question. Document every notice and every fine you receive from any authority claiming jurisdiction over your property. Date them, number them, file them in duplicate, and keep one complete copy somewhere that is not your house. If someone contacts your employer, your clients, or your neighbors, get that account in writing as soon as possible, and ask the people who were contacted to write down what was said to them. If someone damages your property, run your camera footage before you make any other call, and save it in more than one location before you leave the room. The binder does not feel like a weapon while you are building it. It is paperwork and dates and the discipline of writing things down before you forget the details. It becomes what it becomes on the morning the other side picks the time and the location. By that morning, your work was finished years before anyone showed up. If any part of this sounds familiar from your own property situation, drop it in the comments. I want to hear how it went or how it is going. If you found this worth your time, a subscribe means the next story finds you. Coming up, a retired water rights engineer whose mountain stream ran through 3 HOA-controlled properties, and what happened when the downstream neighbors tried to reroute it without asking him first. I am Dale Mercer. The deed is older than the complaint. That is the whole lesson.